Welcome to Tree of Life. We're so glad that you joined us today. Our topic today is Where Are You Standing? And my guest is Maurice Cohn. Welcome, Maurice.
Thank you for having me.
You know, people are talking about different things regarding what people stand for. And today we want to share with our audience the importance of standing. We know a lot of people sit down on jobs. We know a lot of people stand still in the same place or in the same place from year to year. But we want to talk about the importance from a spiritual standpoint of standing. And so we want to bring truth to you about what the Bible says about standing. So Maurice, kind of tell me how does this topic fit with you?
Um, I guess I can go with a time in my life where I was doing a lot of soul search. That's when I was in the gated community of Department of Correction. And how I would clear my head a lot of the times is I would walk around the track. And then, after coming into a little bit of knowledge, I would position myself in the eastern part of the field and stand a certain way, and then I would be approached by other, as they call themselves, travelers. And so that's how I came into a lot of my knowledge because we had discussions on various subjects, but they recognized me because of how I was standing.
Oh, wow. So, people can tell by the way you walk, by the way you stand, a lot of times about who you are. And so, when you had those discussions about, you know, we'll just talk about your soul searching experience or what you had arrived to. Tell me more about what was your takeaways about where do you stand? I know that sometimes we're standing in one place, but what happens when you're standing?
Well, sometimes you get tired,
You get
you
tired.
know. Um, and if you stand in, let's say, in traffic or in the midst of a busy crowd, you're going to be noticed, you
Okay.
know. Um, but you're being noticed either way, I guess, if you're
I
standing.
agree. We've seen our nation come to a standstill in many ways. When the
Mhm.
pandemic came, it was a standstill because it was if they had, stay at home, only essential workers can come out. There were a lot of standstills. But I think the question is not only standing still, but what are you doing when you're standing still? I think that's a big question. What do you think?
Yes, I think it makes perfect sense because even though you might be standing still on what, you know, what are you doing? I mean, but these people here, they were taking a stand, and I don't know. It-
Well, I think that, what are you doing where you're standing? I think, when we had a conversation, you were talking about, we have to be able to, while we're standing still, whether it's a stay at home or social distancing, whatever that is, that we still actually can be in motion and doing something, right? We can still be
Mhm.
giving hope to people. We can still be growing spiritually. Like you said, as you were walking around, that helped you grow and grow closer to God. Even though you were standing still, there was still activity going on.
Yeah, and it's also, I believe there's a time to stand up and then there's a time to stand down, you
Oh,
know.
tell me about that.
Well, no, I mean just like, um, with the situation, the current situation that was, happening the other day. I mean, standing down was not something that they were doing, which they should have. They were standing up for what they believed and they acted on it.
So standing up, there's benefits to standing up,
Hmm.
benefits to actually standing down and not really going against what's happening because sometimes that actually can cause harm or injury,
Well,
not
that's what
only,
happened.
not only to us physically, but spiritually, right? And
Hmm.
sometimes that's when people experience stressors because they have stood up when they really should have just kind of receded, sat quietly and wait until maybe that storm passed by. Um, there's quite a few incidences probably in each of our lives that we have can think of where we could have stood up, right? Or where we could have stood down. And we know that there's a choice, that we all have a choice of what we want to do. Um,
Mm.
and there's examples in the Bible too. So give me a little bit of background about standing up or standing down, either in your personal life or in the Bible.
All right, I guess we'll head to the Bible because I got a couple of favorite characters in there, but one of them, he starts at the beginning, Moses. It wasn't long before he left the palace to where he saw injustice being done to an Israelite and took matters into his own hand, even though he was living in the palace and was over the Israelites, but he knew that right is right and wrong is wrong, and he ended up killing the guy. You know, um, then you have
But then,
Joseph as well.
even
Go ahead.
Moses, I was thinking about Moses, even though he went through that time with the, killing that Egyptian, God still used him. God still used him. So he stood up for what was right because he saw injustice done. He actually did we'll call it a misdeed of killing the Egyptian. And then he fled for his life because he was like, I know that I'm gonna have to pay for this.
Yeah.
But he fled for
Yeah.
his life, and God goes looking for him, right? So
Yes.
even though he was standing up for quote right, he ended up fleeing for his life. And then
Hmm.
God went to look for him while he was standing, back to that word standing, by the
Hmm.
bush. He was standing by the bush. That's how God found him. He was standing by the bush. And that's when God came to him with that flame in the fiery bush, a bush that was burning but not burning. So I think what I like about that story that you brought forth, Maurice, is that God comes looking for us. No
Hmm.
matter what we've done in our lives, no matter how we maybe treat, to hide, to shame, God comes looking for us because Moses was standing there by the bush. My guess is he's standing there like all of us do. We're like, okay, God, what next? But I don't think
Hmm.
he thought he would see God there, but he was standing
Yeah.
there. And God came to where Moses was standing. He actually came to
Hmm.
him. I like that story. I'm glad that you brought that one forward because many times we think that Moses had this heroic assignment of bringing
Hmm.
the Israelites out of Egypt, but he had to stand up to somebody else right before all that happened.
Yeah, he had to stand up to the Pharaoh.
What did he tell Pharaoh?
Well, he tell him, let my people go. But, you know, Moses, he was already, had a, stuttering and going on and stuff like that. So know he probably was scared, but at the same time, him, him and God was on them terms. So he had to do what God asked him to do. And he knew that God was with him. So he went ahead. And,
That is really probably a really good lesson for all of us, that there are times that God asks us to do things and we will give all kind of excuses. I can't speak, I stutter, I'm shy, all of those things. And God wants us to stand up for him. And Moses, with his stuttering and stammering tongue, went before Pharaoh several times, not one time, not two times. He went as many times as God was leading him to go and said, let my people go. And so I think that lesson for us is that we have to stand up for something. Stand up for other
mhm,
people when there's injustice is done, right?
that's
Stand
right.
up and stand still so that we can hear God speaking to us. Stand up for those who are held in bondage. Those Israelites had been under that bondage for so many years that Moses, I want to laugh in my spirit, God had already prepared him for that adversity when he met that Egyptian in that injustice. That was just the first
Mhm,
step. And then he had to take that courage to go before Pharaoh. But again, it was
mhm,
about standing up for right. And that's what we want to emphasize, that it's important that while we're standing, that we're doing something. So give me another Bible
mhm.
character. You were getting ready to say one and I interrupted you. Tell me another one.
Okay. Well, we'll talk about the three Hebrew boys.
Okay.
I like the fact that, they took the stand by not bowing. So the king thought that they should take a stand in the furnace, you know.
So
But what the king didn't realize was that,
I'm laughing because you said that the king had them, well, they wouldn't bow, but they had to take a stand in the furnace. So tell me more about that.
yeah, well, I guess the king thought that, throwing them in the furnace would, uh, do something, I guess, not realizing it was going to be somebody else in the furnace standing with them.
Yes, yes. I think that sometimes we have people or individuals on our job, in our home, in the community, in society, different places that they test our faith in God. And those three Hebrew boys, first they were tested with their diet, and they wouldn't eat the king's meat. Then they wouldn't bow down to his images. And then he says, I'm just going to put you in the fire. He thought that they would recant and then deny their faith. And I think that sometimes we are challenged with those same types of tests, if you will, of what we're going to do, whether it relates to food or what we eat or our diet or our worship or day of worship. Will we retreat? And then they'll put all of these consequences on us, and it's up to us to make a decision to stand or not stand. But I
Mhm,
like what you said is even though they were put in the furnace, somebody was in there standing up there with them,
mhm.
right?
Oh
So,
yeah.
what are your thoughts about that? And, in this common 2021 that we're in, what do you think about how that applies to, where we are in Earth's history right now about the things that we're being faced with and the choices that we have, whether to stand or not stand?
Well, the Bible is very clear about it. You know, it lets you know what's going to happen, tells you guys going to be there with you. So therefore, you need to go ahead and stand up because the goats and the sheep, they will be separated.
Yes, yes. And, God says, I'll never leave you or forsake you. So while we're standing in the furnace, the
Mm-hmm.
difficulties, the challenges of life, we can be certain and assured that God is standing right there with us. And I think that's really, really good news. That's great
Yeah.
news. Any other Bible characters that you can think of? Oh, one more
Mm,
thing. So what I find interesting about Moses' story and the three Hebrew story, both of them have fire in there. The
mm,
bush was burning, but it wasn't really burning. The furnace was burning, but the boys didn't get burned. They didn't even get a cinch. They didn't even smell like they had been burned. But what I love what they
wow.
said to the king is, our God can deliver us. That's not the
Hmm.
question. But if he doesn't, we are still saying that he is God. And I think that's
Yeah.
what we have to really be clear on when we look at what we're facing in our nation, in our homes, in various places, that if God doesn't deliver us, he still is. He's God. And we will continue to stand for right no matter what. Any
Amen.
thoughts about that?
Oh yeah, 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 definitely. I mean, because it tells us that, you're gonna be thrown into, jails, and you're gonna face persecution one way or another,
Yes.
but we just have to know that, yeah, you're not gonna be physically delivered from some of these situations, you know, but we will be, delivered spiritually when the time comes.
I think you bring a very good point forward. We may not physically be delivered, but God will spiritually, absolutely keep his promise that he will deliver us. So I think that's a key point for our audience to realize that many will lose their jobs, many may lose their homes or their cars, they may lose those material things, but they'll never lose that connection with God if they stand up for what is right. And that's really standing for righteousness' sake. And so I think that's an important part to just reiterate about that story of the three Hebrew boys and Moses, that they stood for right. And that's really the righteousness of God. Any other stories that pop in your mind from the Bible of people standing?
Yeah, I got one that I could think of, and then I'm gonna tell you one about me that this past week. But
Okay.
anyway, Joseph. is going to be my other guy, another
Okay.
one of my favorites. You know, just quick to his situation though. When he was already in the house of Potiphar, and Potiphar's wife accused him of assault. Now, you know, you've made very, you got God on your team, or you have a very good relationship with God when you're in this man's house and your character is so well spoken of that this man doesn't even believe his wife. That, you know, he's done something right.
Yes, 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 because he had his character was so um he had a good reputation for a pure character. And I think to your point, he didn't believe his wife because he knew Joseph. He had worked with
Hmm.
Joseph. Joseph had shown that he was a man of integrity and honesty and godliness. And he didn't believe his wife. I can only imagine the wife being pretty upset about that. Because, you know, women, being a woman, you know, you always want your man to believe you, you know.
Hmm.
And so, for whatever reason, she set up that, you know, that lie. That's all I can call it as it is, and
Hmm.
to try to trap Joseph. But you know, Maurice, I do know that in life there are people who try to trap us. I know people will try to mar your reputation. They would say things that are not true, and literally it's our character that we've had before they made those accusations that are going to make a difference of whether or not you're able to get out of that situation. And I think that that's one thing that I would want to say about, you know, as we're standing, what are you doing? What are you doing while you're standing there? And hopefully it is actually building good relationships with people,
Hmm.
right? Connecting in such a way that they know who you are, connecting in such a way that they know your character. And so if someone were to say evil against you, they can say, no, I don't see that person doing that, you know,
Yeah.
because they know you so well. So while we're standing, building our characters are really critical. And that's what Joseph did. Joseph did that. And God used him. He used him during the famine to feed his brothers who had put him in the pit.
Mm,
You know,
mm.
he used that very same Joseph that they thought, you know, we're gonna get rid of him. He used them to really actually help put him in a place where he could help his brothers. And I don't think his brothers
Mm.
ever thought that. And so there's sometimes, you know, not only enemies or strangers, but family members such as Joseph family, really, they even, you know, they tried to get rid of him because they felt that he was the favorite. And so they didn't want him
Mhm.
around. And God, they needed him. They actually needed him. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I do believe that, you know, God will um, allow certain what might seem unjust situations to happen to put you in a better position,
Yes.
you know. But only God can do that though.
No, that's true. That is true. That is true. And I
Mhm.
think when God does that, we have to recognize that and give him glory for it. But I think
Mhm.
in my mind, when the Hebrew boys were in the furnace, they were still praising God.
Mhm.
I presume that when Joseph was down in the pit, he was still praising God.
Mhm.
When they sold him off, I believe he continued to probably sing and praise God. When he was in
Yeah.
jail, in you know, injustice again, he's
Yeah.
praising God, you know, and then he goes to the palace praising God.
Mm-mm-mm. From the bottom to the top.
From the bottom to the
Mhm.
top, he's still praising God because he believed the verse, I will never leave you
Yeah.
or forsake you. And while he was standing still, God was still using him. And you know,
Mhm.
there's a verse in the Bible, be still and know that I'm God. Yes, we should allow God to lead and guide our lives, but we should still be working for his cause, no matter how
Amen.
where we're standing, you know, and how we're standing still. Any other Bible characters you think of?
Not off the top of my head, but I got one of, you know, me, you know, this
Yes.
past week. You know, I had to take a stand because when we go to the gates, everybody knows that I'll take the last chair. Everybody go first. They always, you don't want number? No, I don't need number one. What's meant for me is I'm gonna get it. I'm not worried about that. You go ahead. And so anyway, this one guy, he was sent to this one gate by himself, and I was passing by the gate, and I saw him taking his passenger down. And then he shows up at my gate after the fact, and it's three chairs coming off. Two of them already had gone with the families, and so I'm grabbing the chair from him, because he was like, "Hey, the other people didn't tip him." Well, that's not my fault. You're not gonna come over here and take my chair. But he does that to other people. And usually I'm chill about it, but it's like, no, we not today, buddy. But hey, no violence. He walked up a little, disgusted, but fair is fair, man.
And I think we have to stand for truth because sometimes, as Christians, we believe that we have to always give way to the next person. But we have to stand
Hmm.
for truth because if you don't, then the next time it continues to happen over and over and over again. And, being humble does not mean that people can walk over you. And being
Yeah.
meek doesn't mean that they can treat you any kind of way. But at the same time, we have to stand for right. And that right was exactly standing for right. You've already done your task. I've been called to the gate. I'm here. I'm here to serve. I'm not looking for the money. I'm here to serve the next passenger who needs my help. And I think
Yeah.
that's sometimes people get confused about the work of a Christian. We're here to serve. That's our main
Mhm.
purpose and our goal. And so, even as we think about Moses, he was there to serve in the palace, he was there to serve to get the Israelites out, he was there to serve, and so, and even when he was in the wilderness, he was actually, being a shepherd. And God was actually
Mhm.
training him with those hard headed sheep. And I heard sheep don't like to follow instructions, but he was teaching him first with the animals because he knew that
Yeah.
the people that he would be leading would have some of the same characteristics and behaviors. I've had it
Mhm.
happen to me that you've said something to somebody and they act like they didn't hear you and they just keep standing in the same place. It's like, can we not get moving? You know?
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
Moses had to deal with those sheep, and then he had people that were murmuring and complaining while they were
Mhm.
standing still. They weren't bringing hope and joy. They weren't growing spiritually. They were just standing still and being pretty cantankerous. They were really not being cooperative with Moses. And so when we're standing still, that has to be in such a way that we represent God. You know,
Mhm.
um, I think, you used the word, I heard you say that sometimes people are standing still and they're on autopilot.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh.
So when they're on autopilot, what does that really mean if they're standing still and they're on autopilot?
Well, if you're on autopilot, you are probably not paying attention to your actions. You are just going through whatever motions that you're used to doing, or just for whatever reason, uh, have blanked out. Because how many times you be in the car driving, and then you're home. You don't remember the ride home.
Yeah,
He was just driving.
right, right. So, when you're on autopilot, it's almost like a mindless activity. You're not even thinking about what you're doing. And so when we're
Mhm.
standing still, we need to really know what we're doing and why we're doing it. Because if we're on
Mhm.
autopilot, we may miss those opportunities that God has for us to actually be effective witnesses for Him. And so I say, if we're standing still, we need to know what we're doing because we're on autopilot. We're not going to be effective witnesses for God. There is another standing still that you talked about also was that we have to be aware and make an effort to, of how our actions affect others. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, if you're gonna, we have to be mindful of what we're doing. Because uh, you know, I get a well, probably shouldn't say it, but I find humor. I go on YouTube sometime and I watch these videos of people so caught up in their phones while they're walking and doing all kinds of crazy stuff. I think my favorite was the one lady. I think she was at the mall or something like that, and went head first into the water. I mean, but I mean, you have to pay attention because it might affect you in a bad way, or somebody else. I mean, somebody else could lose their you know chance to go to heaven because they were looking at you on autopilot.
Yes, that's a very good point, Maurice, that sometimes we're not paying attention to what we're doing, but other people are paying attention to what we are doing,
Hmm.
and they could actually lose their way because of what we are doing while we're, quote, standing still and not doing what we should be doing,
Hmm.
or doing it in such a way that it leads them away from God. So I think
Yeah.
that that's a very good point that you bring forward, that, and you bring up a good point about phones. And I'm not on a kick about phones, but phones is a good example of how we could be standing and distracted. People
Hmm.
are walking and distracted because they have that one item, and I'm going to use the phone as the example, but they are standing so engaged with the phone that they don't realize the people that are around them. So they may
Hmm.
miss that opportunity to smile or say good morning or to say hello, or can I open that door, or can I carry that bag for you? Because they are now focused on a tangible item in front of them versus touching the
Hmm.
lives of people that are in front of them. And so I think while we're standing still, knowing what we're doing is so critical, because it can make a difference between someone being saved and possibly someone being lost, us being saved or us being lost. And so I think standing still is really, there are times that we should be standing still, like you say, standing up and standing down. There was a years ago, there was that stand your ground law.
Hmm.
People just say, I'm going to stand my ground. And I don't know if everybody knew what that meant, but it does have some spiritual application. There is some
Hmm.
spiritual application to standing on the grounds that really help us spiritually, help us grow spiritually, help us to bring hope to others, help us to show our love for God more. I think all of that is so very important when we're standing still, or um, when we're standing up. What are your thoughts, Maurice, about? Because I know, like when people protest, we'll talk a little bit about that. People are standing. A lot of times, there's crowd people standing together. Very rarely do you see someone protesting by themselves or standing by themselves. From a spiritual standpoint, how does that translate into a um, spiritual context? People protesting as a group, standing as a group versus standing alone.
Well, strength is in numbers, I believe. You know, um, I think it's I know we're never alone. you know, um, but I do believe that we should take note, and do like the protesters, spiritually. Nobody should have to go to the path alone.
And there are times that we will have to stand alone. The Hebrew boys had three of them. Moses was
Hmm.
one of him. Um, Joseph, it was
Uh-huh.
he stood alone. And so sometimes we will stand alone. There's sometimes that people will go with us, and there's sometimes that they won't. Even though we may be speaking the truth, they may not want to follow the truth because there's just things in
Hmm.
their life that they're just not ready to make that move and that transition. And I like to take us all the way back to how we started the conversation as to when you said that, when you were trying to just kind of, give clarity to what God's plan and purpose was for your life, you would just go walking, and
Hmm.
you were walking with God. He was an invisible, no one saw that. They didn't know that you and God was having that conversation. They didn't know
Yeah.
that. And so as we go through life every day, we should always walk with God and have that conversation
Amen.
with him of what we should and should not do. Because there's sometimes that we may see something and God may say, don't go that way, go the other way. Stay away from that crowd. In fact, don't follow the crowd. Yes, the
Yeah.
protest is maybe a good thing, but I don't want you in that crowd. because there are
Hmm.
times that that's where things can happen, that God may not want to use us in that particular forum, with our voice in that particular forum. And so I think for us, as we thinking about when we're standing still, what are we really doing? You know, are we growing spiritually? Are we loving God? Are we loving people more? You know, are we showing them the way? You know, what are we doing? And so, and are we growing spiritually? And are we giving them hope? So, in any final thoughts, Maurice, about, you know, we've been talking a lot about standing, and I love, got to just commend you for the Bible characters that you have brought forth, who were standing even though they faced adversity. They stood for what was right. And I think we want our audience to know that there are going to be times, not only today, but in the future, that they're going to be challenged with things with what's right, standing for what is right. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that, this the main question should be, um, if someone was to see you, you know, standing there, what would they see?
Mhm.
I think we just have to be very mindful, more mindful of it, and don't just be on autopilot because that's what you're used to doing,
Yeah.
putting on a show for people, because
Mhm.
that right there get you lost.
Yeah, it
So
will.
we,
It will.
we have to be, make it, I forget the word, but I can't even think of the word.
Well, you know, as we grow spiritually,
Intentional.
what's that?
It has to be intentional. We need to
Intentional.
live intentionally.
Yes. As we grow spiritually, our expressions, our countenance, everything should be reflecting more like God. And I was sharing with actually just today regarding, I shared it last night and then also shared it again today about the ride home that I had recently with a Lyft driver who was driving 80 miles an hour down the highway, you know, driving on the lane or trying to get around cars. And I said, but the one thing he did have on, he had on some spiritual music. He had on Christian music.
Hey.
And then what I did is I started humming along with the songs that I knew. And I said, you know, I don't know if he
Okay.
was a Christian, but you know, he might have turned to the music because I'm hoping that he saw that I was, you know, that I reflected a Christian mannerism. I don't know. But all I know is that he had on Christian music. And so I think the way I was able to just subtly convey that I was in agreement as a Christian is by humming along just softly with the music because it was just in the car, us in the car. And so
Mm.
I believe that, like you said, we have to be mindful of our countenance, our expressions. But as we grow closer to God, we will become more loving, more kind, more patient, more long suffering. We'll have all those fruits of the Spirit that people will see Christ in us. We're nearing the end of time, and we know that. And so many of us will have to stand up for right and for truth if God does not put us to sleep. And so it will be those fiery furnaces. It will be those pharaohs that we will have to approach, you know, for ourselves or for
Mhm.
our family or for other people, that we may have to really be an advocate for them. You know, we actually may be the three Hebrew boys. They may ask us to bow down for something. It may not be an image. It could be some form of an image. Those are choices that
Mhm.
we will be faced with, you know. And then also with Joseph, I mean, as we go to the end, people are going to say stuff that are not true. They're going to be outright lies, you know. And really, we're going to have to say, you know what? You can say what you want, but God is my witness. And so, as we close out, you know, I want to close out with Psalms 46:10, and it says, be still and know that I am God." I believe that each of us, God is going to lead and guide and direct us, whether it's at work, church, in the community. He's going to use each one of us to stand. He's going to give each of us an opportunity to stand for truth. And so, it's my prayer, my hope that that we will stand for truth, no matter what the consequences will be, because God is on our side. He will never leave us. He will never forsake us. And if we stand for righteousness' sake, we can actually see Him in the kingdom. Maurice, any final words?
Hey. Um, stand up when it's time and stand down when it's time.
I love
All
it.
right.
Stand up and stand out. Thank you, Maurice. I do appreciate this time that we've shared together. And as we stand up and stand out for God, I believe that we will actually make a difference in this world in which we live. Thank you again, Maurice.
Thank you.